Today we're talking to Joseph J. Cordes, Urban Institute author and Associate Director of the School of Public Policy and Public Administration at George Washington University.
The evidence is still out as to how the recession has affected nonprofits. I mean, we know that the effects have not been good, but the data are just now coming in as to how significant that impact has been. Historically, charitable giving declines in recessions, although not a great deal, although that evidence is largely based on the experience of shall we say, more ordinary recessions than the one we've just experienced. Nonprofits increasingly play a very important role in complementing what the public sector does in the delivery of needed social services. And we know anecdotally that those activities are clearly under strain now, both because individuals are having their own economic problems and are therefore apt to cut back on individual giving, but also because in many cases, partly as a result of nonprofits trying to diversify their revenue streams, we have a number of nonprofits, for example, that have come to rely on government grants and contracts for revenues, very often at the state and local level. As the state and local public sector experiences fiscal hardship, it has to cut back on those activities, and that begins to have a domino effect as well. Of course, the other area in which the nonprofit sector has clearly taken a hit is in the form of endowments of foundations, and that's clearly having a widespread effect, and we know that. The foundations have, in many cases, kept their payouts steady for the first year, but now they are beginning to reevaluate their ability to continue to fund the full range of activities they had before the economic downturn. Well, it's interesting you should ask that question because that actually is a topic that I took up in a chapter of an Urban Institute book, Nonprofits and Government, that I co-authored with Evelyn Brody, who is another Institute-associated scholar. And there we, for example, examined what the evidence was from the Tax Reform Act, which lowered marginal tax rates and theoretically should have affected incentives to give. And for example, the available evidence there shows that it didn't have a significant effect on giving by most taxpayers except for the highest income taxpayers, who the evidence is increasingly showing are fairly sensitive actually to the after-tax price of giving. The motivation of the book was a clear trend that has been observed over time, which is that surprisingly many nonprofits rely much less on giving and much more on fee and other revenue-based sources. And one of the interesting developments that we discuss in the book has to do with the fact that as the economy itself has changed to include a larger component of services and IT-related activities, knowledge-based kinds of industries, these also happen to be areas where nonprofits very often have valuable human and other capital that they can actually take advantage of to gain additional revenue for themselves. The policy question is the additional revenue that they gain, which typically will help them finance the kind of charitable works that they do, worth the candle in terms of greater administrative expenses, perhaps somewhat less commitment to their traditional charitable mission. And these are all themes that we take up in the edited volume. The other aspect of this, which has also become evident, is that under the rubric of social enterprise, one finds a number of otherwise for-profit organizations, for example, Target being one example, Newman's Own being another, where you have essentially for-profit activities where all a part of the profit that's garnered from the activity is devoted to charitable activities. And one of the questions is, what exactly do you make of that development? Is that going to become an increasing share of activities that one might have traditionally thought of as charitable? Are these basically niche activities, again, where someone identifies sort of a unique opportunity? In the case of organizations like Target, is this a mix of charitable activities and some very good social marketing, where they realize that people may be more likely to shop at stores that also have a social consciousness? Again, these are questions that we also take up in the book. you might argue that actually the diversification of revenue sources by nonprofits is actually helpful because some of their activities may have been more severely affected, but then they have other revenue sources that they can turn to. And one thing certainly that my research has shown over the years is that nonprofits are very resourceful, very imaginative organizations as a group, and they find ways of coping with these activities, but there's only so far that they can go in coping with them. I mean, at some point, they will not have an alternative but to cut back services, and that will have an impact on the very people that need to rely on those services in times of economic need.